Big Ten pretty bad, excluding the Buckeyes. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, joining you late on Saturday night of week 3 of college football. Washington, Utah have just started second half play, so I'd like to catch this game. And Utah just turned in a nice play on defense, trailing 14-7 in the third quarter, as the Huskies try to pull away in this one on the road against Utah, two teams that I predicted to go to the Pac-12 championship game and play the rematch there. But let's run through college football on Saturday, and of course, a host of big matchups in prime time, led off by Ohio State and TCU. Buckeyes win it, basically, as many of us predicted, to be an exciting game with a lot of big plays, a lot of explosive plays, because there's a lot of dynamic players on both sides of the ball, on both teams. So a lot of scoring early and then late. In the middle, not so much. The defense has kind of stalled the offenses out in the second and third quarters. But the Buckeyes, despite taking some shots from TCU, outlast the Horned Frogs and proved to be the better team in the fourth quarter as they exploded for big plays on defense, offense, and special teams. Again, late third quarter, early fourth quarter to take control and win it 40-28. Alabama dominates Ole Miss 59-7. I will speak to that victory as well, even though I only saw a handful of plays from that game as I was focusing on closer games. USC jumps out on Texas 14-3, then succumb to the Longhorns, who blast the Trojans in the second half, winning going away. I believe it was 37-14, the final score. You've joined Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We bring you on a consistent basis, day in, day out, not just during the football season, but throughout the year, the very most insightful, best analysis of college football, discussion, and debate that you will find online. You can check out the audio if you don't have time for the video. You're running errands, you're running chores, you are working out, whatever you're doing, that the audio makes more sense for you. You can catch us at Google Play, Podbean, iTunes, and Stitcher. Also, we would ask you to use the links in the description section of any of the videos. So go to any of the videos that you watch. You'll see in the description section the Amazon links there. You don't have to purchase those products to help us out. Just use the links to go onto Amazon to do your regular shopping. And then finally, the newsletter, which will be unveiled, at least for this week, week 3 on Monday. We've released our first 2 editions to plenty of favorable feedback. So we appreciate your comments and suggestions and you pumping us up with some good feedback. So I like to hear the constructive criticism, but I also appreciate you guys letting me know, hey, we like the newsletter. It looks good. You may want to try this, but hey, we love it. And this is what we like about it. So thanks for the inspiration and the encouragement. That is the Voice of College Football newsletter that comes out every Monday. All right, let's get to the games. And again, the big one tonight was Ohio State 40, TCU 28. All right, I didn't take any notes on this game. Just enjoyed the game with my son, and we checked out USC and Texas as much as we could. Also, Purdue losing another game to move to 0-3 late against Missouri. I caught the last drive there with Drew Lock leading the field goal drive at the gun to give the Tigers a win on the road, making up for the big loss in Columbia last year to Purdue, 35-3. What else did I check out tonight? Of course, Washington and Utah, a game that I really want to see and have yet to see one play from this game, but I've got it on DVR, and I will watch most of the fourth quarter as we have just started the second half here. But in terms of TCU, Ohio State, and as soon as I get done with my spiel, I will take calls at 860-325-3786. That's 860-325-3786. And I will check out what you guys have to say on the chat. But it seemed to go along with the script that many of us laid out, that this would be a barn burner, great game, explosive plays, fun game, crazy plays, wild game, freakish athletes on both sides of the ball for both teams, and that the Buckeyes would kick it into gear as the team with more depth and a superior roster top to bottom and break away in the fourth quarter. And that's what happened, 40-28. I picked the game, if you recall, you can check me on the tape, 38-28 Ohio State. So the Buckeyes won it 40-28. So I picked TCU plus the 13 points with Ohio State winning the game outright. And that's what's important. Bad day for the Big Ten. Wisconsin. That is the marquee loss for the Big Ten, obviously, as a top 6 team in the nation, losing at home to BYU, who is much improved, but still, BYU lost to Cal last week. They go to Madison. They beat the Badgers. Again, I'm going to have to catch up with exactly what happened in that game. I saw bits and pieces. I saw the final Wisconsin drive that led to a missed field goal by the fifth-year senior at the gun that would have forced the game into overtime with Wisconsin possibly escaping, but that was not to be. They missed the field goal. BYU played the better game by all accounts. They were the better team on the field and deserved to win, earned the victory, and they won it 24-21. So that's a black mark for the Big Ten. Just like that's probably the biggest black mark against the Big Ten right now, because the Michigan loss is understandable. On the road to a top 10 team, close game, even though Notre Dame outplayed Michigan. The Michigan State loss, we'll see how Arizona State plays the rest of the year, but even a little bit more understandable in that Michigan State wasn't supposed to be on that very, very upper echelon of the Big Ten. But this Wisconsin loss is a bad loss for the Big Ten. And the lesser teams in the Big Ten are getting beat up. Purdue loses again. They move to 0-3. Okay, you could argue that Missouri is a mid-tier team in the SEC, and Purdue looks like one of the lesser teams in the Big Ten. Northwestern, I don't know how this game turned out. They were losing to Akron tonight in the fourth quarter. Akron, the Zips were beating a Northwestern team that has won 10 games 2 of the last 3 years, 32-28 in the fourth quarter. And of course, Nebraska lost as a double-digit favorite. That's 3 Big Ten double-digit favorites today losing. Maryland, a 15-point favorite, losing to Temple 35-14. So it's the number of losses, it's the disparity of score, and it's also the opponent. Nebraska as a 10 or 11-point favorite, losing to Troy by 5. Again, Maryland, 15-point favorite, losing by 21. And then the Wisconsin game again, a 23-point favorite. I thought and knew generally that was way too many points to give BYU, and the Cougars win it outright by 3. But the Wisconsin loss, that was the big one today, no question, in terms of contention for a college football playoff, for a Big Ten championship, even though that doesn't affect the race as a non-conference game. But perception for the Big Ten down. So Ohio State saved that just a bit with the win over TCU 40-28. And that was in question with TCU playing a better second quarter, leading going into the half, scoring first in the third quarter, going up 21-13. I had a bang-up day in the predictions. Now, we'll see what happens with these late games. But right now, against the spread, guys, I picked Clemson minus 33. That was a loss. I picked Toledo plus 10.5. That was a loss. I picked Boise State plus the 2. That's a loss. I took USC plus 3.5. That's a loss. And I took South Florida to cover 11. That's a loss. So that's 5 losses. The rest wins. 13 wins, 13-5 against the spread. Georgia minus 33. They covered. Iowa State plus the 18.5. They covered. They only lost by 10. Penn State covered 35. Syracuse plus 3. They won easily by 23. I took Vandy in the 13.5. They only lost by 5. I took BYU in 22.5. They lost, or they won the game. I took LSU in the 10.5. The other big story of the day, the Tigers, the Bayou Bengals winning over Auburn. That's the second marquee win for LSU this season. This young season, in 3 games, they've already defeated Miami and Auburn. Auburn on the road, an exceptional football team, and LSU is now 3-0. Anyway, I took Texas Tech plus the 1.5. They won by 22 points. I took SMU in 36. They only lost by 25. I took San Jose State and 42 points. They only lost by 12 or 14 points. I took Bama to cover 21.5. That was a layup. They won by 52. I don't know about Mississippi State. I picked the Bulldogs to cover 33. I believed they did. I took Purdue in 6. They lost by 3. I took TCU in 13. They lost by 12. I squeaked that one through. And I took Duke plus the 3, and they won by 13. And now late tonight, I've got Utah plus 5.5. I've got San Diego State plus 6. We'll see what happens. All right, I'm going to go to the live chat. And I never did give my Ohio State TCU analysis, did I? I was really impressed with both quarterbacks. I was not impressed with Austin Mack dropping 3 passes. I would have probably benched him, and I'm not a gut reaction, quick reaction kind of guy. But Ohio State goes 5 or 6 deep at wide receiver, and they don't need Austin Mack dropping easy passes. And that's funny after he delivered the first big play of the game with the long reception that should have resulted in an Ohio State touchdown on the first drive, but he dropped a perfectly placed ball past 2 defenders in the back of the end zone on the first drive for the Buckeyes. Ohio State's defensive line played a spotty game. TCU ran the ball extremely well in the first half with about 150 yards rushing in the first half. But when you've got that much talent along the front, and football games are typically won by big mistakes and big plays, big positive plays and big mistakes. And Ohio State made more big plays, and a few of those plays were turned in by its defensive front. You saw what Nick Bosa did off the edge in forcing that fumble that led to an Ohio State touchdown in the end zone, recovered or not recovered by Draymond Jones, who had his foot on the back end line. And then you saw the play that Draymond Jones made when the defensive push got in the face of Sean Robinson and threw the pick right to Draymond Jones, who was just throwing guys out of his way en route to the touchdown that gave Ohio State a bit of a 2-score cushion. All right, let's see what you guys have for me tonight. NCIS Fanatic 21, finishing strong is all that matters. Buckeye State Sports, Ohio State beat TCU, Michigan beat SMU, Penn State beat Kent State, Indiana beat Ball State, Iowa beat Northern Illinois, ignoring the rest of the Big Ten scores, I suppose. Dondre says that Penn State is pretty good. George, I love the targeting call in the Texas game right toward the end of the game. That was a damn good hit. Michigan State did not play today. What do we have? So, DJ Bucci, I hope I pronounced that right. Welcome to Mark Rogers TV. I've not seen you comment before. We welcome you to the Voice of College Football, where we do it better than anyone else when it comes to discussion, debate, and analysis. So thank you. And we know you're riding high. I don't want to ignore the LSU game. What they did today was monumental. How did we all discuss LSU football this offseason? They're ultra talented. They've got top 5 talent, but they're dysfunctional. They've got a coach who doesn't know what he's doing. They've got a quarterback who's never thrown a meaningful pass. They're bringing back less running back talent than they have in decades. The defense is good, but it's thin, so it's really talented on the first line. But if they have any injuries, especially to the secondary, that's really going to hurt. And it's a long season, and they've got a lot more football to play, but they destroyed Miami, and then they were one of the few teams in the country that I believe could go to Auburn and pull out a win. And that was impressive. I did watch LSU-Auburn pretty much every play. I watched Oklahoma-Iowa State. That was my focus at noon. I diverted a little bit to Florida State Syracuse, so I took that in a little bit. We talked about that analysis earlier in the day, and also Miami Toledo. Again, my focus was LSU and Auburn. I didn't get to see as much Boise State and Oklahoma State as I would have liked, but many of us, including me, really liked Boise State to go into Stillwater and win that game. But by looking at the big plays that were made in that game and Oklahoma State extending its lead in the second half, they were clearly the better team in that game. I'll have to go back and look at the numbers, the recap, the stats, and probably take in the highlights. If not, maybe a shortened version of that game a little bit later this week. So Oklahoma State certainly proved that, or at least gave us indication that they might be a factor that we did not consider in the Big 12 championship race. But LSU, huge win. That is the biggest win of the day. Ohio State may have forged the biggest win for a conference on the day and for themselves, of course. But if Ohio State wins the Big Ten, they win the Big Ten, and they're going to go to the playoff as long as they don't lose 2 games and somebody else has a loss. Alabama has one loss. But for Auburn and LSU, for LSU to win a game in the SEC Western Division on the road against a team that had already beaten Washington, that was just an enormous win for the program. LSU has not had that kind of win that really mattered in years. And the boost for the quarterback, the boost for the head coach and his credibility, it was enormous. To beat Miami, it was certainly big, but it was at a neutral site. There could always be called into question, okay, you're an SEC power and Miami's overrated. They lost their last 3 games last year. They looked bad. They're overrated. They were overhyped, and they're really not that good. But we know Auburn's good. We know that this is generally the same defensive front, quarterback, wide receivers that beat Georgia and Alabama last year, that beat Washington to open the season this year. We know that Auburn is really good, and LSU beat them on the road. George, I'm not calling today. Somebody give him a good call because I'm worn out. 860-325-3687. I'm not going to keep you guys too long because this is my big frustration with college football on a Saturday. I'm here because my kids are a little bit older now, and my son watched some of the games with me. He watched the second half of LSU-Auburn, then watched the Ohio State TCU game with me. But when I had little small kids, I'd actually take them outside and do things with them, and I'd DVR like a madman, and I'd be watching football till 4 o'clock in the morning. But now my kids are grown and they got their own thing going on. So I can sit here like a complete moron and watch football from noon until 2 o'clock in the morning. And I still sit here all day and think, oh, I want to see that. And I want to see this. And I want to see that. And I'm not going to get to see that. And I'm going to have to tape that. All right. Somebody's calling in. Let's take our first call of the night. Apparently, I didn't get to it on time. So whoever called, I did answer the phone before it shut off, but for whatever reason, it didn't take it. So please call back. I'll get your phone call. I've got the phone right here. 860-325-3687. Big Bubba Blue says LSU is so underrated right now. They should be number 5 on Monday. Well, Big Bubba Blue, I hate to give you a spoiler alert for my top 25 tomorrow that makes sense, but LSU is going to be number 1 in my top 25. They've earned a number 1 position.
The call will start at the beep.
All right, it's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Howdy, it's Bash again, and I was actually debating on calling because I've called so much, but I'll probably take a break, let people get another chance early in the week while I'm out.
Well, Bash, nobody else is calling. We've got a few other people calling, so you might as well call. What were your thoughts on today's games?
You know, I just want to say first off, props to you because it took me a second to realize I'm like, so Mark kind of hit it on the spot when I got into the stream. I'm like, Mark kind of hit it in the spot. Didn't he say something like 38-28? And then you
38-28.
Like, yeah. You said 38-28, right?
Yes, sir.
And it ended up 40-28, so you weren't too far off.
Not too far. I'll take it.
Props to you.
Thank you.
Props to you. I also, so I got this system in place, and I'm in this like group with what was like 25 people. It's kind of fallen off a little bit to 19, but I got so substantial like picks group we go down the line and we have 10 pick'em games, 5 against the spread, and 5 over-unders.
Okay.
And what's interesting, I'm doing so much better than everyone this week. But in pick'ems, I'm 4-5 this week, pending the Utah-Washington game, which doesn't look good for me right now, considering Washington's up 2 scores and driving. I mean, they're at the 45 right now, but they're moving the ball. So I could go 4-6 in pick'em, and I did so well in spread and then over/under, and still to be determined with Fresno State and UCLA, which is the other over/under I got. But right now I'm undefeated 4-0 over/under and 4-1 against the spread. That one miss was Ohio State by 1.5 points, so I'm a little bit salty about that. I was kind of like, Ohio State, do you want to just tack on a field goal here at the end of the game? Get me on the over.
Well, the way J.K. Dobbins ran that final carry, you think if they would have run the ball one more time, maybe they would have had a good shot to get it into the end zone. If you remember, Bash Gaming, the end of the national championship game against Oregon, they were up 35-20. They could have sat on the ball, but they ran it in with just a few seconds left on the clock. It looked like it might be a repeat in the same stadium, but they chose to sit on it.
Yeah. I was very impressed with TCU's wide receiving core.
Absolutely.
And it kind of showed up like Texas A&M. I think Shawn Robinson also played good, but not to the level that Kellen Mond played against Clemson. So that, and the offense for Ohio State was more potent, really, than Clemson's offense. So that's really what was the difference. And this kind of did have, to me, a little bit of a Texas A&M Clemson feel to it, except the fact that, holy cow, okay, I'm sorry. I'm watching this Utah and Washington game, and something just happened here. It was almost a fumble recovery big. Anyway, back to my point. Texas A&M, Clemson, it was just kind of one of those games that just the other team wouldn't go away, and you always felt like they had a chance until the very end when they made a play. The Ohio State's offense just made plays. It was a little bit different, but still kind of had that similar feel to how the teams were.
Okay. Very good. I don't have much of a response for that. Yeah, I just think that the game, I think that the game generally went as many of us said, as I stated off the top, that TCU would make plays. They've got speed and athleticism all over the place, and that they would make plays in space. The Ohio State defensive front was so dominant. Not every play in, play out. They gave up plays, but when you have that much talent up front, you're going to make disruptive plays. And games like this are made by big mistakes and big explosive plays, and that's what we saw the defense take hold with the 2 enormous plays, the 2 touchdown plays out of the defensive front.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned the big plays that they allowed to. What kind of got on my nerves, and I was just kind of like cringing about, was when they had that 93-yard touch on Darius Anderson, and that dude can fly.
Mm-hmm.
I have him on my Yahoo Fantasy College Football team. Didn't start him. Don't know why. That dude can straight up fly. And when they motioned over the wide receiver to stack the right side of the field from Shawn Robinson perspective, right side of the field to 3 wide, everybody in the secondary shifted, which is fine, but I saw Malik Harrison shift from that right side on the linebacker because they're running a 4-man front nickel, and I saw Malik Harrison shift from that right side defensive perspective, right side towards the middle of the field, and it looked like he was supposed to be spying on Shawn Robinson. And if you didn't have that dual threat capability of Shawn Robinson, or at least not, trying to contain him with Malik Harrison, that 93-yard run probably doesn't happen because Malik Harrison probably clogs up that hole on that right side. So that was definitely a good job by TCU's offensive play calling to notice that, look, we got this linebacker in a nickel who's overcommitting to the quarterback. Let's get this gap, which should be clogged up by a linebacker, and let's hit it for a big gain. And that's exactly what they did. That made a huge difference in that game. And that got, me and other Buckeye fans around the nation sweating for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were a number of – yeah, go ahead, Bash.
Go on. I was just going to kind of transition to more Big Ten stuff, but you can make your point, and then we can do that.
No, that's okay. I was just going to make some points about some crucial plays that happened or almost happened. Pass interference calls, but we could point to those in just about any game. So go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So more with the Big Ten, it's weaker than I expected, but some of the exposures of the high-end teams don't surprise me. What Wisconsin had problems with today, they had a little bit of problems with inexperience at wide receiver, and basically it wasn't like Hornibrook couldn't throw the ball. All that was really just happening was they didn't have the receiver experience. The route running wasn't fantastic. They weren't quite getting into space well enough. So it was really just Jonathan Taylor against a physical BYU team that, they aren't great by any, but they're much improved. BYU is. They took Cal to the wire. I don't think too low of Cal. I think Cal's not too terrible of a team. Definitely a bowl team. And beat Arizona as well, and kind of setting that standard for containing Khalil Tate in that game. So this isn't too bad of a BYU team. They just kind of exposed the weaknesses of Wisconsin that I was pointing out all offseason, just thinking I didn't think it would happen against BYU, but they got Iowa here coming up. And they got to fix a lot of things, Wisconsin does, if they want to win that game, because it's in Kinnick Stadium, and that could possibly be for the West, because as bad as Wisconsin looked today and as inexperienced they looked on the outside at wide receiver, those are the two teams in the West that are going to be fighting for the spot. I picked Iowa to win the West in the preseason, and I just have that feeling continuing that Iowa defense is going to suffocate Wisconsin, and Nathan Stanley is going to make a couple big plays, and Torrin Young is also a really good running back to watch for Iowa. In other news in the Big Ten, everyone just disappointed today, other than, of course, Michigan taking care of business. Michigan State was idle. Penn State just took care of business, but if you look at the depth of the conference, it's seriously hurt. Like, we react to that Northwestern loss against Duke. You're like, okay, it's bad. They didn't score a lot. But Duke's not necessarily the worst team. Akron's not the worst team in the world either. They're 7-5, but it's Akron. And then, Nebraska at Troy, everyone's talking about this game as a possible upset in Lincoln, and you sleepwalk through that game. Like, you got to be aware when everyone's saying, look, this is a possible upset. This is a team last year who upset a top 25 team, whether you agree they should have been top 25 or not. They upset a college football playoff top 25 team. So you got to be aware of that. And the only thing that really didn't let me down was Purdue. Purdue played against Missouri kind of how I expected, a close one. I was back and forth on that. I ended up picking Purdue in the end. I thought they were going to bounce back. I wasn't too far off of that. So, yeah, rough day for the Big Ten. Big day for just – I think the Big 12 looked pretty good as well, even though TCU lost. I think they look like contenders in the Big 12 for sure. Oklahoma and Iowa State had a pretty good game. That game was fun to watch. And lastly, LSU making that statement, that's kind of goes without saying. All right, so that I just kind of went on my rant, talked about today. I'll catch you later. Let's see if Utah can come back here, and see you later.
All right, Bash. Appreciate it. You have a good night. Bash Gaming joining us again tonight to give us his recap on the Big Ten. This is how bad the day was for the Big Ten. Aside from Ohio State, it could be argued that the second best performance turned in by a Big Ten team was Illinois, losing only by 6 points, 25-19 to South Florida, a team that was extremely good, of course, last year, and beat Georgia Tech by 11 last week. That might have been the second best performance out of the Big Ten. It was between the Purdue loss by 3 points at home against Mizzou, Illinois only losing by 6 at home to South Florida. Of course, there were other wins in the Big Ten, but they were expected. And yes, a Big Ten team, regardless of who it is, should not lose to any MAC team. It just shouldn't happen. And Northwestern, they're a program that has had these kind of stumbles. Even when they've had good teams, they have had stumbles against MAC teams. The Big Ten wins 95% of its games against the MAC. So Northwestern, being a slightly upper echelon team in the Big Ten, it should take care of its business against the MAC. But I bet that Northwestern's roughly winning about 7 out of every 10 games against the MAC, and they laid another egg tonight in losing to Akron 32-28. Not an elite MAC team. All right, we've got another call coming in. It's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, of course. And you can join us at 860-325-3687. Who's on the line?
You got Volunteer Roadshow. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Appreciate you joining the show. What's going on tonight?
Yeah, I've been watching you for a little while. I really like your show. I tell you what, my show's centered around the SEC, and what I'm really surprised about is the bottom half of our conference. There seems to be several teams that nobody really paid much attention to. LSU, Texas A&M, Vanderbilt gave Notre Dame a run. I think Missouri's going to be there at the end. Of course, Tennessee and Florida, they're kind of in the same boat. We're just scratching to get back to a semblance of what we used to be, and that's years down the road, in my opinion. But I just think there's several teams, and especially LSU. How about LSU? They've surprised a lot of people. Texas A&M, at least played very well against Clemson. I just think the bottom half of our conference, and you couple that with, your regular Alabama, they're a recruit machine, and then along with Georgia. I tell you what, Georgia's recruiting like a madman, and their super team is next year. I just think the conference is probably going to be better than it has been in the past starting next year. They're already great. I think they're the best conference, but I think there's a lot of the bottom half teams starting to get better, and I think recruiting is probably the impetus for a lot of that.
Absolutely. So Volunteer Roadshow, I could not agree with you more. Sometime this week, now that we've passed week 3, and as you well know from knowing the way the schedule lays out, aside from the Notre Dame games that they play against USC and Stanford and their ACC contract, and besides those games that your teams in the SEC Eastern Division play against the ACC the last week of the season, Florida, Florida State, Georgia, Georgia Tech, and those 4 games, all the non-conference games are basically out of the way. So we've got about 90% of them in the book. So I'm going to take a look at the conferences and how they played against one another. And I will state it right now before I crunch the numbers, but I want to give it a ranking 1 through 5, that the SEC is the best conference in college football. I said that before the season started, just based on what I thought the talent was and the coaching and just my perspective projecting toward 2018. But now we've seen 1 or 2 games played by everybody against Power 5 opponents, and you are exactly right. So the only disappointments right now in the SEC is that Arkansas got trucked by North Texas, and pretty much what else has the SEC done wrong? Next to nothing. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Alabama is the most dominant team.
We're coming up on a stretch where we're all going to be knocking each other off. I mean, before the season, you look at Tennessee's schedule. I had them going 6-6. If everything went well, possibly 7-5. But if you look at it before the season started, we had Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Auburn, South Carolina. That's one of the toughest 5-game stretches in the country, and we've got to play that 5-game stretch pretty much every year. Last year it was Auburn out of the West. I mean, LSU out of the West instead of Auburn. But now we're getting into conference play. We're going to start knocking a lot of us. There could be some upsets. I mean, you could have a middle-tier SEC team knock off of Georgia, or maybe do something weird. You never know. The SEC has deep tradition, deep rivalries where we hate each other. And you can take the spread all you want and who's supposed to win, but the SEC is the SEC. There's always a big upset in this conference, so who knows what's going to happen. I'm picking Georgia to win the SEC only because everybody's picking Alabama, and I want to look like a genius if it happens. But anyway, it's just an exciting time. There's nothing better than college football, and when it comes right down to it, in my mind, there's nothing better than SEC football. And I'm an SEC homer. I'm not trying to put down the other conferences. The Big 12's doing great. Yeah, the Big 10's had a sloppy day, but they've got some good teams up there. I just love college football. I love the pageantry. I love all the traditions that goes around college football, all the rivalry bowls, the backyard brawl, the egg bowl, the iron ball, all these things. It's just a great time to get away from politics, to get away from all that's going on in the world. I just love it. And that's really why I started my channel last year. And it's just great. The fans are fantastic. I love the fans. And it's just a great time great time of the year. I mean, this is better than Christmas for me. And I just love it. And I'm just excited to see how this conference turns out the rest of the season.
So, Volunteer Roadshow, I appreciate you jumping on the line here and your comments on a regular basis. Where can people find your channel?
Volunteer Roadshow. I do a couple of live shows every week, Tuesday and Friday, and then a post game. And I do some pre-recorded stuff and done some collabs with Pigskin Pete, Uncle Lou, and a lot of us guys have just do a lot of collaborating together, and it's just a great time. I just love the fans that I interact with. I travel the country and get to meet a lot of them in person, and I just love the fans. I mean, before I started my deal, I had the typical, I hate Alabama, I hate Georgia, I hate Florida. But when they started coming in and supporting my channel and having a lot of good camaraderie, man, that just changed my perspective 100%. And how I look at the other teams in the conference. But I just love the fans. It's the greatest sport on earth, better than the NFL, better than Major League Baseball, better than the NBA. College football is the creme de la creme, in my opinion.
Hey, Volunteer Roadshow, I don't know if you've had a chance to catch some of my segments on Tennessee football with Mike LaValle from Last Word on College Football and Charlie Burris from the Orange and White Report. Have you caught any of that?
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know those guys. Yeah, they do a good job, and I've seen some of your stuff. It's great. In fact, I didn't even know about you until one of my callers said, "Man, you need to check out Mark Rogers TV. He does a good show." And so I came over about a month or so ago and started checking you out. I really like it. I'm more of an entertainment, just letting the fans call in and take over the show and just turning it over to that. Not so much analysis, because I don't get to watch a lot of TV on sports. I'm a truck driver. I do the call-in show right from my truck, and I get consume most of my sports on the radio.
Okay.
So I don't get to watch so much of it, but I really enjoy your analysis, and you're clean. I don't have any language on my show, and I really appreciate that. I mean, there's going to be a few words slipped here or there, but it's just great platform that you're doing, and I appreciate it.
When you were running down your rivals and some of those fan bases that you didn't particularly like until you started to mix it up with them, Tennessee, and I made this comment to Mike, I think the last segment we cut, Tennessee has more, they're not made up, they're legitimate rivalries. Vanderbilt, Florida, Kentucky, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, they're all legitimate rivalries. They're big rivalries. I think Tennessee's got the market on rivalries.
Yeah. And that Tennessee-Alabama rivalry, I know it's been lopsided for the last 11 years. Before that, we were 10-2. But if you go back 75 years, you got the General Neyland and Bear Bryant. Bear Bryant never beat General Neyland. But you take the whole 75 years, that's one of the top 5 rivalries of the past 75 years, in my opinion. I know it's lopsided, but you ask anybody over 50 years old in the state of Alabama, who do you want to beat the most? And most of them will tell you Tennessee. Younger people that don't remember the old days, they'll say Auburn. And but anyway, I really appreciate your show. I've got to hit the road, and nice catching up with you, Mark.
Volunteer Roadshow, we appreciate it. You're welcome anytime.
Thank you.
You have a good night. Volunteer Roadshow talking Tennessee football, and he's got to be happy about today's result, even though it was expected over UTEP 24-0. We see Jarrett Garantano went 12 of 16 with a touchdown pass, a very clean effort for him with no interceptions. as Utah is bringing back a interception, I believe, or a fumble recovery down inside the 5-yard line. Ty Chandler had a huge game today, 12 carries for $158, but of course, tougher times for Tennessee as Volunteer Roadshow laid it out for us. They've got one of the toughest stretches in college football coming up. All right. My slice of the Tennessee-Alabama rivalry, just to add to what Volunteer Roadshow was talking about, is I was in the SEC from 1994 to 2000 at a CBS station as sports director. And at that time, it's funny because Tennessee owned that rivalry. I did not see Alabama win a game against Tennessee. Hey, it's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, this is Jan 716 in the chat, man.
Hey, what's going on, man?
Hey, man, I just want to talk about most of the games that have went on and talk about how the playoff committee, has viewed these games. I feel like the most important factor that the playoff committee that they take a look at that they really don't talk about, I feel like is projection. I feel like they look at some of these teams, they look at conference plays, they take all that into consideration, but they also take a look at what if we match this team against, like an Alabama, like an Ohio State, potentially, one of those power teams. What if we match them against them? How would they fare out? And, I feel like with conference play, with the Pac-12 struggling, you got a powerhouse like Washington right now. I know, I'm watching the game too, but, Utah, they're ready to score a position. But, with the Pac-12 struggling, with the Big Ten struggling, with some of these, the ACC, with Florida State, I mean, they got I was at the Syracuse game. They got absolutely dismantled by Syracuse. It's kind of for the committee to take a look at some of these conferences and take a look at these teams. The SEC, of course, is the most dominant that we've seen. It's kind of this is probably the year that resembles more like probably 2012, 2011, when the SEC used to have 6 teams that had 10 wins. Which was absolutely ridiculous. But it's very interesting to watch most of these teams, and I feel like conference play against these non-conference opponents. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy to watch, Mark.
So basically what you're telling us is, I don't know that the playoff committee could necessarily do it at this stage of the season, but as we come down the stretch, that they're trying to avoid what we saw when you really look at the first 3 years of the playoffs before last season. Aside from that Ohio State-Alabama shootout, that was a great game in 2014. All the rest of the games were blowouts, except for the championship games. The semifinal games were blowouts. They're trying to avoid the Alabama-Michigan State kind of scenario, 38-0.
Yeah, or like the Ohio State-Clemson situation.
Sure.
That situation happened when Penn State won the conference championship, but they also beat Ohio State in that situation. But they felt like, overall-wise, Ohio State was the better team. They felt like Ohio State was the better team, and they put Ohio State in the playoff. And then look what happened, to Ohio State. They got dismantled 31-0. So I do feel like these, later down the line, let's say November, or maybe when the rankings do first come out, because we all know the AP polls, they really don't mean anything. It's really the committee that committee for the rankings. That's what matters. And I wouldn't be shocked at all to see if we could potentially see the LSUs, the Georgias, the Bamas. We could see them. We could see possibly those 3 teams in the top 3. It wouldn't be surprising at all. Of course, Ohio State, I think they'll be in the mix. But looking at conference play, looking at from a Michigan State, looking at the Washingtons, the Wisconsins of the world. I mean, who would have thought Wisconsin were going to lose to BYU today? With Jonathan Taylor and potentially those linemen that could all of them could potentially be draft picks. Who would have thought they would have lost? To BYU. So, for going down forward when conference play is involved, and if we're in that critical mark, if we're in a situation like Alabama or an Ohio State have to fight for a playoff spot, who's going to get in? It's probably going to be the SEC team because of what the SEC has done for the past 3 to 4 weeks to start off the season. And of course, you look at conference play today. Of course, Arkansas and Tennessee. Of course, Tennessee. Well, they're doing better, but Arkansas, they really didn't help the SEC a lot. But, for example, Vanderbilt. If Vanderbilt would have upset Notre Dame today, which they also did, that would have opened doors. And I'm not going to say 3 teams are going to make the playoffs for the SEC, but that could have been a whole new different discussion. Because what if Vanderbilt becomes that team that comes out of nowhere, and they start to potentially challenge Georgia for the SEC, and all of a sudden, we go back to 2012, how there's 6 teams in the SEC that's winning 10 games.
So you make some great points. I just want to elaborate because I don't think Arkansas, sure, if you're going to measure the entire league 1 through 14, yes, it's embarrassing to lose to North Texas, especially by 17 points. But still, I don't know that anyone's going to give any credence to an Arkansas loss by 17 points. They're going to look at the top 7 or 8 teams. If the league's that strong and that deep, 8 to 10 teams deep, that's what's really going to be diagnosed. And you brought up a good point, I think, with the Vandy Notre Dame game. Can you imagine if Vandy would have pulled out that game? And to me, they acquitted themselves extremely well. They had a dropped pass, and it was a tough catch if you were watching the game at the 10-yard line that might have led to a first down that would have propelled them to a victory. Can you imagine Vandy winning at Notre Dame? Let's say Notre Dame has a 10-2 season and they're a top 10 team, and Vandy beat them, and then Vandy goes in the SEC and goes 2-6 in the SEC because they can't beat the other teams, but they went to Notre Dame and beat Notre Dame. That's saying a lot for this conference. And for Ole Miss to go to Texas Tech and play a neutral site game and beat them by 20 and probably get hammered throughout the SEC, and they're virtually winning all the major non-conference games. So it's funny because we're all trying to avoid, or most of us are trying to avoid, and because me being the purist that wants to see as many conferences represented as possible, I would hate it. But to your point, we had our first 2-team from the same league college football playoff year. Think if Alabama barely beats LSU, let's say it's a great game. LSU goes 11-1. Alabama goes undefeated. They play Georgia, who is going to be a huge favorite in every regular season game they play. And Alabama and Georgia are undefeated and playing in the SEC championship game. And whoever wins that, you're going to have an undefeated team as the SEC champion. You're going to have a 1-loss Georgia or Alabama, and you're going to have a 1-loss LSU team that's going to have that loss to the number 1 team in the country. What are you going to do with those 3 teams?
That actually really could happen because, every time Alabama plays LSU and Baton Rouge, it's a close game. It's most of those games are going to the wire. And, what if LSU, what if they go undefeated? What if they win the SEC and they beat Georgia in a close game? They beat Bama in a close game, but Bama only has 1 loss, and we have the same situation last year. We know the playoff committee loves Alabama because they know that if they put Alabama in the college football playoff, they're not going to get blown out. Because they're going to project Alabama, okay, they're going to compete. They're going to fight in. And if we have to, let's say for an Oregon or a Washington, one of these other types of schools, potentially UCF, if they go undefeated, are we going to choose those teams or are we going to choose Alabama? We're going to choose Alabama all the way because we know that they can compete. And so I do think that even if Vanderbilt, again, if they would have won that game, it would have just opened all types of doors. But even that they lost today to Notre Dame, it was a close, competitive game. And I feel like the playoff committee, that's actually going to be a plus, a win-win type situation for the SEC. Like, wait a minute, Vanderbilt, a team that last year was mediocre, all of a sudden they can compete with a team like Notre Dame that is ranked 8th in the country according to the AP poll. Wait a minute here. Like, how tough is the SEC? We know that they're the best conference, but are they back to where they used to be? Are they back to when they used to have 6 teams back in their prime that literally you can put them in the national championship and they're in, the A&M, South Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Auburn. Those teams could be Missouri. Those teams could be favored to win the national championship. Can we go back to that? And, for the first 2 or 3 weeks, we are on that track and we're on that road. Now, of course, we're going to have to see, what happens when LSU plays Georgia or Alabama plays Auburn, Alabama SEC fan, you have got to be excited because, you know, as much as I wanted Vanderbilt to get that upset, I'm an SEC fan. As much as I want Vanderbilt to win that game, I'm still proud of the effort that they displayed because for the SEC, you know, you literally made a statement and saying that, listen, we can get, hey, listen, most of the teams in the SEC, we can compete with anybody. Not everyone can. We all know Arkansas and, you know, Tennessee. Not, you know, most likely those teams aren't going to happen. But the SEC has the most talent. Every team in the SEC has been in the top 50 in the recruiting rankings for years now, which is absolutely amazing. That's a hidden stat that most people didn't know about. But so we all know those teams can compete with anybody in the nation. And how good really is the SEC? Are they back to their prime? And if we do have that situation, going back to my original point, if we do have that situation where Alabama or an LSU or Georgia are in a three-way tie and they're in a race to make the college football playoff, and you have all these other teams like in Ohio State, like in Oklahoma, or like in Stanford, who is the playoff committee going to put in? Because these are not the computer rankings. These are people's opinions that matter. And the SEC, you know, believe it or not, I mean, we all know the committee loves the SEC.
Hey man, I don't mean to cut you off. You make a ton of great points. The only reason I'm cutting in here a little bit is because you've gone on for a little bit and you're starting to you're basically repeating the same point, and they're all really good points. But that, to summarize, in my view, the SEC was the dominant conference from roughly the mid-2000s up until about 3 or 4 years ago, and it wasn't an argument. Nobody could argue that the SEC was the best conference. Now, we could argue how much better it was than the other conferences, and I typically took the stance that it wasn't quite as dominant as was made out by the groupthink media. But over the last 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 years, as you well know, the Big Ten has jumped in there. The ACC had a great season 2 years ago, and the SEC has taken a hit. Now, it always has had the best talent. The recruiting rankings tell us that, and the NFL draft tells us that the players coming in and the players going out are the best in volume. But the coaching, the head coaching spot took a hit, and a lot of the best head coaches left the league, and therefore the conference took a bit of a dip. And I tell you, for a guy that crunches these numbers and tries to rank these conferences all the time, I've had the most difficult time doing that over the past 3 or 4 years because I haven't been able to separate these conferences. Now, I don't want to overreact, but we're talking about 12, 14, 15 games played that are meaningful this season in the first 3 weeks. And basically, the SEC has not tripped up once. Yes, Arkansas is the worst team in the league, and they lost to North Texas. But Vanderbilt, to clarify your point, if Vanderbilt turns out to be the team that we expect them to be, they are the 10th or 11th best team in the SEC, and they just went to Notre Dame and played within one score and a final drive, a first down, of having a shot inside the 10-yard line of beating Notre Dame in South Bend. That's how good this league is.
Yeah. I mean, you know how the committee already loves the SEC. So just imagine if somehow, some way, the SEC goes back to having at least 5 teams having 9 or 10 wins.
They've passed every test. LSU beat Miami, Alabama killed Louisville, Auburn beat Washington, and we can go on and on. Ole Miss beat Texas Tech. Mississippi State went to Kansas State and won by 3 touchdowns. Texas A&M played a great game against Clemson. Sure, they didn't win the game, but the 7th or 8th or 9th best team in the SEC played a team that's going to go to the college football playoff within a 2-point conversion of winning. The team is not, the league has not taken a bad game yet this season, a meaningful game.
Yeah.
Well, I'll make one exception. I would have liked to have seen, as an SEC fan, Tennessee play a better game against West Virginia. I thought that they would play a little bit better. But again, Tennessee's one of the 3 or 4 worst teams in the league, and they were playing a team that's expected to contend for the Big 12 championship. So that's no big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And And I would just say this: it's not fair for the other conferences. Like, if Oregon goes, let's say Oregon has like a trip-up loss, and but we all know Oregon should have won the game. And if we do have it to a discussion where we have an LSU or an Alabama that are competing for that final spot, but the committee puts them in because of what the SEC did in the previous, it's not fair to them. It's not even fair to, if UCF goes undefeated. I feel like that's a team that isn't mentioned. I understand their schedule is not as strong, but if they go back-to-back seasons with undefeated, I mean, the last team to do that, like, wasn't that like TCU or Boise State, like back when they were competing like in the WAC or in the Mountain or the original Mountain West conferences? I mean, if UCF goes back-to-back undefeated seasons and they're not in the playoff, at least in the discussion this year, it's like what is the playoff? What is the playoff committee? Like what seriously are the playoff rankings? Because we've seen what UCF done against Auburn, and we've seen what they can do this year if they go undefeated. So how should it be fair that we have all these teams in the SEC that are being mentioned, but UCF or some of these other conference schools that are proving that they can compete are not even in the discussion? So I fear that potentially is going to happen. I feel like that's my one fear because, again, I love college football. Especially I love the UFC. I love college football. And I don't want to have this. I don't want to seem like it's rigged like boxing today, like with Canelo Alvarez versus Triple G. Oh, my God. But, if we could potentially head down that road. And, that's probably what my fear is about.
All right, man. I appreciate the call. And thanks for loving college football and watching us here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football.
All right, Mark. Have a good day, man.
You too. You're welcome anytime. Have a good one. Yeah, bad 3 weeks for the Big Ten, bad week for the Big Ten. Ohio State salvaged some pride tonight with a win over TCU. Now we need to see how good TCU is going to be in the pack in the Big 12 this season. So, as we well know, if TCU is a major contender in the Big 12 later this season, that's going to mean something. But if Ohio State just beat a team that's going to finish like 5th in the Big 12, then it's not going to matter as much. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
This is DeAndre. How you doing tonight?
Hey, DeAndre. I'm doing just fine. How are you?
I'm doing good. I didn't get a chance to see the Ohio State TCU game, but hopefully they get a chance to play it because of the storm down here in North Carolina.
How are you guys doing down there?
I'm doing good. It's doing good down here so far, but they still got some more rain coming.
Yeah.
Carolina and NC State game got canceled, and East Carolina also against Virginia Tech. But what about Duke? They look good so far.
What about Duke? Duke had the line of the week for me as a guy that will throw a few bucks at a few games. I could not believe that Duke. I know that Daniel Jones missed the game, and I know that they lost their best cornerback in Mark Gilbert, but Duke was a 3-point underdog at Baylor. I was laughing at that line. I scooped that thing up. They won by 13 points, and they're undefeated.
Yeah, I wish I would have took it.
I tell you.
Yeah, I wish I would have took it. Yeah. But I ain't going to hold you alone tonight, but, I mean, the ACC Florida State, I don't know what's going on with them. Clemson still look kind of shaky on offense to me. I wish they'd make a decision that quarterback go with one or the other and just stick with it through the rest of the season. But Florida State, I just don't know what to say. But I did pick Syracuse to win the game because, I mean, after what Stanford did to Florida State, I had to pick Syracuse to win that game. I just can't believe how awful Florida State looked with all that talent.
Yeah, I would not have been surprised if somebody would have told me, oh, Syracuse is going to win this game 27-24. I would have said, absolutely. They're at home. Florida State's been a mess. But Florida State did not score a meaningful point in that game. They didn't score until it was 23-0. I saw bits and pieces. I was watching the other two games on at noon, but I just I saw the final drive of the first half in particular, and Florida State, I believe, was down 6-0. They could have taken the lead, and it was just such poor clock management, and it was also poor game management. They got inside the 10-yard line, did not throw the ball into the end zone or to the sideline. They threw it in the middle of the field. The clock ran out with them inside the 10-yard line. Just poor play, poor execution.
Right. Well, and after this, I'll let you go. But I hate to say it, and I have nothing against Alabama. You never heard me say anything bad about them, but that Nick Saban offense right now looks great. I mean, I don't know how to pronounce his name. Charles, he's the best. They got the best offense.
You can just call him Tua, Dondre. Just call him Tua. That's good enough.
Yeah, Tua. Yeah, he looks great. I mean, Alabama looks great. They look unbeatable. I don't think Clemson or Georgia or Ohio State in my top four can beat them the way they're playing right now. And I know Ole Miss defense is missing a lot of players, but they're great, and I can't wait to see them when they play LSU or Auburn or somebody that has enough depth to keep up with them. But I don't think anybody's going to beat them. I don't think LSU can score enough points, and I don't think Auburn can either.
It doesn't really seem like it, does it? They are just a different offense. They had so much talent before with Jalen Hurts at quarterback, but they were hamstrung by his inability to threaten the defense downfield. And now that they've got that sharpshooter Tagovailoa throwing from, slinging the ball all over the field, and he is so smooth throwing it and so accurate and just has a laser arm and is smart with the football for a freshman. Well, he's a sophomore now. They've put up 51 on Louisville, and they put up 59 on.
That good on offense with Jerry Jones, with Julio Jones and Mark Ingram at the same time. I just don't think anybody can beat them.
It doesn't look. It doesn't look like it. The way things are going right now, it does not look like it.
Right. You have a great night, Mark, and I've been listening to the show. Hope to see how some more callers come and call in. You have a great night, sir.
All right, Dondre. Take care down there in North Carolina.
Yes, sir. Have a great night.
So, yeah, that's a good reminder there. I've been watching some of the coverage over the weekend on the events and the weather down in the Carolinas. So our thoughts and prayers go out to those folks that we hope are safe. The last estimates I saw that there were about how many people pronounced dead because of this storm. It's awful. And about 800,000 people had lost power in the Carolinas as well. So our thoughts and prayers go out to them. Definitely some really good football games, especially North Carolina State and West Virginia canceled, but that does not matter. All right, guys. I am going to, as I mentioned a few minutes ago with one of the callers, because about 85 to 90% of the non-conference games have been played, except for those ACC, SEC rivalries and some of the Notre Dame games against the ACC and Stanford and USC. We've got a collection of games that we can look at and rank these conferences. So I'm going to do that this week. I'm going to rank the conferences, the Power 5, 1 through 5. And I think you have an idea, as I do, what the numbers are going to tell us. They're going to tell us what our eyes and what the results have told us, and that the SEC is once again undisputed best conference in college football. Until we see bowl games and see postseason play, that's what it's going to be this season.
The call will start at the beep.
Hey, it's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who do we have on the line?
Hey, it's Buckeye State Sports.
Hey, Buckeye State. What's going on, man?
First off, earlier in your stream, you mentioned that because I ran down everything that happened in the Big Ten, you only read my comments when I said the Big Ten teams won. So I didn't ignore what they lost. You didn't see that comment.
Okay, I just thought it was funny that you just put up the Big Ten scores of the winning games in the Big Ten.
No, I commented who all lost, and I put who all won.
Okay.
You just didn't see the other one.
Yeah, there's a lot of comments that are scrolling by, and I'm talking to people online, and I'm talking myself, and I try not to ignore you guys as you may see. I try to give you guys as much love in the comment section as I possibly can. So I try to pick out what you guys are talking about, and sometimes I miss out on these conversations because I don't see the context or the beginning of the conversation. What's on your mind?
Right. Well, there's one thing I want to get your opinion on. I think the top 5 teams in the country have completely separated themselves from the pack.
Okay.
Talking about Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, Oklahoma. Do you think there's anybody else that you consider putting in the top 5 at this point?
So as soon as you spit out that 5 teams have separated themselves, so those are exactly the 5 teams that I put in my head. So we're thinking on the same plane there. Let me give it a quick scan. If anybody else could possibly challenge those 5, of course, I want to see Ohio State go to Happy Valley and have to take on Penn State. What we saw out of Michigan and Notre Dame leads me to believe that they're not quite ready for Ohio State, but obviously teams change throughout the course of the season. Wisconsin was never that team. Yes, they're really good, but this Wisconsin edition may not be as good as the team that we saw last year. We're not seeing it out of Miami yet, obviously. The 2 exceptions to that might be, I don't think they are, but would be LSU and Auburn would be the first 2 teams that would come to mind that could possibly join that group, but I doubt it. I think you've nailed the top 5 teams in the country.
All right.
Did you want me to come up with something else? I can tell you Minnesota, they're 3-0. We can put them up there. The Gophers, PJ Fleck, 3-0.
Indiana's 3-0 too.
Indiana's 3-0.
Might as well put them up there.
I think that's it for the Big Ten, right? Those 3, that's probably it. Right. Indiana, Minnesota, Ohio State. That's it for the Big Ten. Wow. Oh, Iowa. Iowa's 3-0.
Penn State.
Yeah, Ohio State, Penn State, Indiana, Minnesota, Iowa. There it is.
Yep, that's all the. I mean, Northwestern's undefeated in Big Ten play.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. And that's about all we can say for the Wildcats right now, who served up the latest of the Big Ten embarrassments tonight, losing to Akron. Unthinkable. Anything else going on, Buckeye State sports?
I just want to assess the Ohio State defense real quick. I think
sure.
The D-line is great. It's one of the top 2 or 3 lines in the country. The DBs, I'm not so sure yet. They could be good. They could be bad. I don't really know. The linebackers, I think, are very talented and poorly coached. I don't like Bill Davis as a linebackers coach, and I think he hasn't done a great job the last 2 seasons with a lot of talent. And I think that could bite us if we can face a team that can move well in space.
And that was generally the issue, especially in the Oklahoma game last year, is that the linebackers were exposed in space.
Yeah, I remember that very, very vividly.
So do you think anybody in the Big Ten can challenge Ohio State?
Well, absolutely they can challenge Ohio State. I don't think anybody is going to beat Ohio State. I think Penn State's a little too young and lost too much. I don't think Wisconsin can really match up. I suppose if Michigan or Michigan State could get better as the year goes on, they might, but I'm not seeing anybody that could beat Ohio State, but challenge them, sure.
All right, man. Thanks for the call. We appreciate it.
Yep.
Have yourself a great weekend.
You too. Good night.
Good night. Buckeye State Sports. Buckeye Nation happy, especially considering 21-13 did not look good. Of course, there was still plenty of time and still plenty of time to come back and only down 8, but they just were not playing well in any phase of the game at that point. when you looked at the numbers of Dwayne Haskins, they looked good, but they had not scored a touchdown. Their touchdown was scored by the defense at that point, so it took until almost the fourth quarter for the offense to generate points on its own, even though they put up big yardage totals. And then they really exploded in the fourth quarter with J.K. Dobbins leading the way with 18 carries for 121 yards. All right, it appears as though Washington is safe. I did want to watch this game and came on right at halftime, but, the time gets away from us. We've got 3 minutes left. Myles Gaskin has run for 144 yards on 30 carries. 3 minutes left. Washington up 21-7, and they have the ball. So, game's over. This is a pick that I missed basically because I was trying to make it fit my season narrative. I really thought Washington was going to win this game and cover the 5.5 points, and they did. And we've got the 2 a.m., although it's 1:13, the dreaded emergency service warning that comes on the TV. You know what I'm talking about with that annoying alarm? Just came on the TV. I don't know if you could hear it. So Washington's safe. They passed their first test in the Pac-12. They have to win out. They have to win all their games, most likely, unless there's chaos in the other 4 conferences, to make it to the college football playoff. All right, I'm going to give my general overview of where we stand right now. Okay. Let's start in the Pac-12. We'll continue right there. Of course, there's a huge game next week with Oregon playing its first meaningful game against the Stanford team that's already won 2 tests against USC and San Diego State. Well, how good is USC? They went to Texas tonight and completely blew up, imploded in the second half and losing to a marginal Longhorns team to date, 37-14. So USC may be in for a really rough year. So this Utah loss may not be as detrimental to the Utes' pursuit of a Pac-12 championship that we thought, because I was looking at a very narrow entryway for Utah to get to the Pac-12 championship game. But if USC is not able to correct its issues, then they're going to lose more than 1 or 2 games in the Pac-12. So Utah needs to beat USC at home when those 2 teams meet in October, take care of business elsewhere, and at least play within 1 game of USC in the Pac-12 to make it to the conference championship game. Washington, Stanford, Oregon need to work things out in the Pac-12 North. Washington appears to be the best team, but Stanford right there. But Washington a little bit more athletic, a little bit more explosive. So I will stay with my Washington-Utah pick for the Pac-12 championship game. In the Big 12, I got to see Kyler Murray for the first time this season from the beginning of the game all the way through the end, and he's just as impressive as the hype. He has a rocket arm. He throws the ball with touch. He throws it on time. He makes the right decisions. He's so athletic. He's got a burst to the corner. He is really, really good. The Oklahoma running game took a hit, obviously, with the loss of Rodney Anderson 2 weeks ago. The playmakers in space that they have in the home run threat in Marquise Brown is tremendous. Oklahoma's better on defense than they were last year, although they still got hit up pretty big in the passing game. The running game of Iowa State was not able to do much against Oklahoma. The Sooners didn't shut them down a la Alabama with like 30 carries for 45 yards, but they shut down David Montgomery, one of the best in the business, 21 carries, 82 yards. Oklahoma right now is the class. They have separated themselves, in my mind, from the rest of the Big 12. It's a run for second place. It appears between TCU, West Virginia, Texas, most likely those 3 teams. But let's not forget about Oklahoma State. I did not get to see many plays, but apparently they had to be really impressive at home against Boise State in defeating a good Broncos team that was projected to be in the top 20, top 15 in the nation this year, to beat them by 3 scores today. That's impressive out of Oklahoma State. And in what we expected to be a down season for the Cowboys, maybe they can be a dark horse contender for the Big 12 championship. Of course, the story in the SEC is sheer Alabama dominance and also the emergence of LSU. Right now, the Bayou Bengals have the 2 best wins of any team in the nation, beating Auburn on the road, especially, and also capped off by the Miami win at a neutral site in a dominant fashion. LSU is remarkable right now. They are limited. If you watch them play, they're not a dynamic offense. Joe Burrow had his issues passing the football early in the game. He started off 6 for 20. He finished 15 of 34, but that boy played really well when it counted, made the throws when it counted, and played a clean game in terms of not turning the ball over. LSU is really, really good. They're not real deep on defense. They need to stay away from injury. Nick Brissett has turned into be a marquee running back, a guy that they can rely on in terms of carrying the load when it counts. Auburn misses the power running game that they had with Cam Petway and most notably Kerryon Johnson last season. Jarrett Stidham did not have a great game, overthrew receivers, and Auburn still came within that much of winning that game. They had too many mistakes in the secondary late in the game, pass interference calls, and LSU and Auburn played a classic SEC Western Division game, and LSU and Ed Ogeron, who has lifted his rear end off the hot seat for now at 3-0 and 2 very meaningful wins over top 10 teams off the hot seat, and LSU, Alabama should mean something in November. All right, the SEC Eastern Division is extremely fun right now in terms of a race for second place. Look at what Vandy did at Notre Dame. I did not see the first 3 quarters. I locked in on the 4th quarter. I saw Vanderbilt really physically match up with Notre Dame. Now, Notre Dame has issues throwing the ball because Brandon Wimbush is not that type of quarterback. He has not developed into that passing threat downfield. So Vandy could load up on the run, play Wimbush's run. He was successful in spots, but Vandy was the best team on the field in the last 10 minutes. They just could not complete the final drive when Kyle Shermer tried to fit a ball into a tight space in tight coverage, but he put it where the receiver could catch it, but it was just barely out of his reach. It would have been a remarkable catch. And, can't think of the kid's name. Lipscomb could not come down with it. Vandy otherwise would have had the ball 1st and goal inside the Notre Dame 10 to pull off an upset at Notre Dame. That's what we were talking about earlier when we were talking about the narrative of the SEC being the best conference, being a rock-solid storyline right now. Alabama blasted Louisville. Ole Miss won at a neutral site game against Texas Tech by 20 points. Mississippi State beat Kansas State on the road by 3 touchdowns. LSU crushed Miami. Auburn beat Washington. Who am I missing? Anybody else? Mizzou went up to Purdue and didn't necessarily win convincingly, but they got the victory on the road against a Big Ten team. There have really been no down moments, meaningful down moments for the SEC, even again in a loss at Notre Dame. Vanderbilt, who is going to most likely turn out to be the 10th, 11th, 12th best team in the conference, played toe-to-toe with Notre Dame 22-17 in South Bend. All right, the ACC is, of course, Clemson and everybody else. Florida State was awful today. Think about it. Syracuse is largely considered the worst team in the division, and they dominated that game against Florida State. It was ugly to watch Willie Taggart's offense once again. They have been outscored by 2 FBS opponents, 57-10 this year. They still have to face Clemson, North Carolina State, Louisville, Boston College. They still have to play Miami in a couple weeks. For the Canes, what do we have right there with the Canes? Well, we've got a 49-24 decision in which Malik Rocher did not look extremely impressive, but he got the ball in space to his playmakers, which were so much overmatching the Toledo secondary that it was just a cakewalk in regards to talent differential on the perimeter for Miami. DJ Dallas had a huge game. Miami won going away. They did what they were supposed to do as just a 10-point favorite in Toledo, and they pretty much in the second half mauled a Toledo team that was game, that was ready, that stayed within 1 or 2 scores most of the game, and they put them away in the 4th quarter, 49-24. Elsewhere in the ACC Coastal, it doesn't much matter at this point. It's about Duke and Virginia Tech possibly challenging Miami. Those would be the 2 teams that could possibly get it done. The Big Ten, I will address at a later date just because I've got a phone call coming in of a personal variety. We talked Big Ten over the last several minutes. Ohio State clearly carries the banner, but that could change in 2 weeks when Penn State invites the Buckeyes to Happy Valley. Iowa has a date with Wisconsin. That's going to be fascinating to see if the Badgers still own the West or whether Iowa can stay home there at Kinnick Stadium and work their magic at home with Nate Stanley at quarterback and a front seven on defense. Especially the defensive end position is where Iowa is elite. Noah Fant at tight end. Maybe this is Iowa's year to break through and win the Big Ten Western Division, as they did a couple years ago in 2015. We will have more on the Big Ten. We will have more on the SEC because those are the two power brokers in college football. And I am going to crunch the numbers on everything that we've seen thus far in regards to Power 5 teams matching up against each other and what these wins and losses mean and rank the conferences this week. I'm going to look at the games that have been played, of course, today. I will rework my top 25 and tomorrow release my top 25 that makes sense. And the team that is going to be standing at the number one position is not necessarily the best team in college football, but they've got the best resume and they play along the bayou and they talk funny and their coach talks really funny and he's a character, but right now they deserve to be ranked number one. This is Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. I invite you to subscribe to our newsletter, The Voice of College Football. Please just send your email address to MarkRogersTV@gmail. If you know anybody else on the chat that subscribes to the newsletter, just ask them about it to see if it's any good. We have received favorable feedback on the newsletter, so please subscribe. Just send your email address to MarkRogersTV@gmail. I will not clutter up your inbox with anything else, just the one mailing per week. And we will take your comments and suggestions, as always, on how we can make the Voice of College Football, the newsletter, even better. But that will hit your inbox every Monday, week 3 coming up. Also, please, if you do any shopping on Amazon, just grab one of the links down below in the description section. And if you use that link, that helps out the channel. You don't have to buy the product. Just use the link to enter Amazon, and that helps us out here at Mark Rogers TV. Thanks so much for everything that you guys do in supporting the channel. It was another great week of college football here in week 3. We will see you soon. That means tomorrow with our top 25 right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football.